Hi, and welcome to Pulse, your weekly podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital, and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse+IT Media. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your other host, George Margellis.
George, are you excited?
Our very first podcast episode. Very exciting, Louise. I mean, it's taken us a while to coordinate ourselves, but here we are, and we're looking forward to a lively discussion around what's happening in health IT around the world.
I'm so excited because we launched it at Digital Health Festival a few weeks back now. Are you getting bombarded with people saying, when's the first episode dropping?
I must admit, I've had quite a few people ask me that question. I sort of said it's in production. Just watch the podcast feed and wait for the most spectacular episode to come along. Here we are.
I know, it's so cool. One of the things I thought we should let people know, George, is you and I have known each other for a really long time. Did you want to let people know where we actually met?
It is basically 20 years, isn't it? So It was MedInfo 2004. It was around about this time of the year in San Francisco. I was working for a company doing health IT, and you were a recently graduated student who was very excited to be over in San Francisco. But I have to say, I was extremely impressed. I was obviously a grumpy old doctor, and Louise was this energetic young student. And 20 years later, here we are still working together.
Well, we were both 20 years younger than we are now. That's true.
Well, we haven't changed at all, have we?
Absolutely not. No. So, and what have you been up to recently, George?
The last couple of weeks have been interesting for me. So, as you know, I was supposed to be over in Amsterdam for health, but unfortunately I had a family member have an accident. So I've actually had the pleasure of enjoying the Australian healthcare system over the last couple of weeks and watching how it's changed since when I was last working there 20 years ago. And yeah, it's been an interesting experience to experience healthcare from the inside again.
Oh, I hope your family member's doing okay.
Doing much better, thanks. I have to admit, the healthcare system did a great job of looking after her, but like I said, some of those little frustrations are still there.
Oh, and I'm sorry you missed out on going to health. Does that mean you've just been watching people's posts on LinkedIn with a little bit of regret?
A little bit of that, but I must admit there were a couple of events that I couldn't go to because I was going to health. So I've actually been attending those. So it's been fairly busy. I've been to a couple of aged care conferences. I've been to a couple of startup events. I've been doing things, but I was looking forward to, because after Amsterdam, we were heading off to Greece for a bit of sun. So my tan is definitely going to be affected this season.
Okay. Well, since we're not recording video, I can let you all know George looks amazing.
And what about you, Louise? What have you been doing?
Yeah, the last fortnight's been pretty busy. So one of the startups that I'm working with, I'm helping them raise capital right now. So I'm spending as much time as possible accepting meetings with venture capitalists and family offices from all around the world, actually, pitching on behalf of this startup, which I will talk about at another time. But that's been really fascinating to be on that side of the fence and pitching to VCs and seeing what questions they ask. We'll talk about startups a lot during our time here on Pulse, but I'm spending a lot of my time these days in the startup space and having a ball.
The last few years, you've been a strong supporter of startups. So watching it from the other side is obviously seeing how the sausage is made is often an interesting experience, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. Okay, so George, shall we get to our first hot topic?
Let's go with it.
All right, now let's start with AI-related news. The International Monetary Fund has recently released a report that caught headlines everywhere because the authors said that they had profound concerns that generative artificial intelligence will result in massive labour disruptions and rising inequality. Now, to be fair, the report did call out the potential for generative AI to boost productivity growth, but when a group of economists call out the elephant in the room, it's something we in healthcare all need to know about. So I had a look through this report and it does recommend several macroeconomic fiscal policies. It wasn't really focused on health, but it had specific things that I think are related to healthcare, such as investing in continuous education and training programs to prepare the workforce, investing in infrastructure that supports AI deployment in a socially inclusive manner. So in the health sector, that could involve things like public funding for fundamental research, necessary infrastructure and applications in healthcare that are potentially maybe less likely to attract private investment, but are crucial for public welfare. And the other point that the report made is that the authors stress the importance of an agile policy approach. So this is really important if you run health services and work in them. You should be prepared for both mix of business as usual as well as highly disruptive scenarios. So how do we deploy AI technologies that enhance service delivery without disproportionately disadvantaging healthcare workers and patients? So, George, what do you think? Is healthcare even ready for this new world? I mean, so many of the conversations that we're still having in healthcare, at least in Australia, are still dealing with paper records or transitioning to an EMR.
So it is interesting. So whenever you get an AI report, it either is telling you that AI is going to save the world and the world's going to be a rosy, sunny place because of AI, or it's going to destroy the world. And they usually start off with a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger as Terminator as part of their proposal. I think healthcare is preparing itself for it. And part of that is the fact that data is the oil that AI relies on. So therefore, we need to make sure that we're actually gathering high quality data. And I think that's been part of our learnings over the last 20 or 30 years with EMRs, that we've realized that EMRs are data repositories. If the data is crap, the EMR is crap. Therefore, we need to work on improving the quality of the data. And the mindset of clinicians and people engaged in healthcare are sort of starting to understand that. Started to see that a lot more in aged care as well, whereas data was usually collected there only for compliance purposes, but now they're understanding the value of it. So I think we're on the journey. I think healthcare is probably ahead in some ways in that we've actually started researching this in an active way. So we actually do have universities doing some interesting research around AI. And, I subscribe to the New England Journal of Medicine AI Trends Journal and a few other things. So I think we have, because we've always had that research initiative in healthcare, have probably jumped on that wagon before some of the other industries and therefore watered down some of the hype around what's happening.
I saw actually just last night that the MRFF have just put out from Butler's office a whole bunch of funding to different AI-related healthcare projects. But I agree with you completely that the research is something that we've already been working on, but there's still so much to do, isn't there?
Look, there is a lot to do. And like I said, we've just seen the release of the latest version of GPT and we've seen all the excitement around that. The generative AI has grabbed a lot of attention. And look, it's fun. I mean, I love typing things into generative AI and getting it to give me answers. I actually asked it to do my tourist program for Amsterdam and it came up with a great program. But there's a lot more AI that's under the radar that we don't know about, but that really has to play a role. So I think we're getting there. And it's that classic statement, we heard many years ago, will AI replace doctors? No, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors who don't use AI. I think that's the model we're going to get to. And we need to probably start including it in curricula. We start including it in CPD. We just need to start accepting the fact that it's going to be there. But at the end of the day, the healthcare still has some very personal aspects to it that we can't ignore.
Definitely. I was reading some LinkedIn posts last night where people were discussing the idea of banning AI, and Enrico was the one who called out in the comments, actually, that horse has bolted. But people certainly are feeling under threat. We've seen in California, nurses are protesting not so long ago with signs saying, trust nurses, not AI. So people are feeling under threat. I think it's a good segue to the next hot topic, which is still AI related, but over to the UK now. And the NHS have announced plans to open an AI-run physiotherapy clinic in an effort to cut waiting times. The clinic will provide same-day video appointments with and I kid you not, digital physiotherapist is what the release says, via an app that responds to information provided by the patient. Now, according to the company's website, patients can self-refer. Their digital physio will assess you and then you'll be provided with weekly 30-minute appointments with this digital physio. And they use AI to customise your treatment program. Now, I know we're going to have a lot of listeners in the Pulse audience that are pretty sceptic about this. So I'll let you know that the app has actually been approved by the UK's health regulator, the Care Quality Commission, as a registered healthcare provider. It was also tested in pilot studies with more than 1,000 NHS staff who suffer from back pain. And of those surveys, guess how many said their experience with the app had been at least equivalent to seeing a human physiotherapist?
I know the answer.
100%. 100% of NHS staff said it was equivalent to seeing a human physio, and 57% of patients said they thought that the AI experience was better because it was so personalised to them. Now, of course, I have an allied health background. I do love that people behind the AI are leading the charge from allied health, and allied health aren't necessarily getting left out, as they too often do. But I have so many questions. What do you think about this story, George?
Quite a few observations. So the NHS is pretty famous for making big announcements. I mean, 20 years or so ago, it announced that it was going to digitise England in the next 3 years, and it was going to have NP Fit, and it was going to have a totally digital healthcare system back then. And yes, we all know what happened. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, and I think it was one of the events that you organised in Melbourne, we had Babylon telling us that they were going to automate general practice. And they were going, and I remember I was in the room at the time. and I put on my grumpy old doctor hat, and he sort of said, yeah, grumpy old doctor, George, you know what the acronym is, and we won't go there. But I think there's two things about this. If 100% of people think that this is as good or better than the normal NHS physio service, it probably says something about the normal NHS physio service. And if you looked at some of the LinkedIn posts, there were quite a few comments about the shortcomings of the current NHS physio service. And that's probably really related to workforce. I mean, if there aren't enough people there, they're forced to do things in a way which is suboptimal. One of my big bugbears about all these sort of comparisons is that we tend to compare things with bad practice rather than good practice. Yeah, we think compared to bad healthcare services, AI is great. But what we really want to do is shift to good healthcare practices, much more personalized care, which utilizes the technology to improve the efficiencies, but still has that personal touch. So I'm a bit ambivalent in that I've seen lots of NHS announcements. So I take my hat off to them. They do sit at the cutting edge. They do things that no other healthcare service is willing to do and publicly proclaim them. And then they change government and we start all over again. But I'll watch this with great interest.
I agree. And actually something we should probably have a look at in future episodes is what's going to happen to the NHS budget as well, because they've got a big election coming up around the corner and things are going to change over there, I think.
Yeah. Well, the NHS, as we know, is already under severe financial stress. And yeah, the good news about that is that the British doctors all come out to Australia instead. So it's good for us, not so good for our colleagues and friends in the UK. But yeah, the NHS is 80, 85 years old now. Great initiative. The idea of free at the point of care for everybody in the country. No other countries really managed to do it at that scale, but it is hard. Trying to do that and do it at a low price is what's that classic triangle: quality, safety, and cost. You can't get all three of them at the same time.
Yes, exactly. No, it's a challenge. Well, we'll pay attention to that story and we'll revisit it after it's launched. Well, heading back home for our next hot topic and a non-AI story that came out this week. A website that nobody is using. So the federal government built a website for the purposes of comparing medical fees, and it's only being used by 20 doctors. Now, what makes this a story is that the site has cost $24 million. The Medical Cost Finder website launched 5 years ago, and so far, out of about 36,000 specialists nationwide, only 20 have provided their fees for listing on the website. Now, the good news is about 640,000 people, according to government documents, have actually viewed the website, but mostly the information on there is only average costs that Medicare has access to. At Senate estimates, where this story originated, it wasn't clear on how individual doctors are being encouraged to include their particular fees. George, what do you think is happening here? That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. I mean, let's be honest. We also try to encourage doctors to put personal health summaries and notes into My Health Record. And we've been struggling with that for 10 years. And I actually did go onto this website because I was looking at procedures that needed to be done and there was nothing there that was useful. Look, I think we need to actually have much better discussions with our doctors around the need to share information, both clinical information about what we do with patients and financial information, because it is an issue. I mean, even though those of us with private health insurance still end up with some surprise bills. And I've seen this just recently. I've had a relative enter aged care and some of the price shocks are coming there. Transparency is critical. And we just need to develop that culture of transparency and the ability to share that information. Mandation is hard. I mean, I don't think we can mandate it, but if we have a culture that by properly sharing information, we get better services, better quality, and it may require us to do a little bit of incentivization. Yeah, it is frustrating. And unfortunately, the intention is great, but the implementation, as in many other projects, still struggles. And I think that's where we really need to improve our quality of service here in Australia.
Yeah, and I think we can do so much better about engaging clinicians. I know myself, every time I go to a GP and I hassle them a bit, because in my health record, I have information that has come out of Medicare and the PBS and the AIR. I've never been able to convince a GP. Even last time I went to a different doctor and I put it in the notes. This is what I want. I booked a long consultation so it could get done and wanted to talk about an actual medical issue as well. But at the end of discussing my medical issue, that she didn't have time. So I would have to come back another time. And I was like, oh no. But we do have a lot of clinicians who are using it. So I think that's probably a whole other conversation about how we engage more effectively with clinicians who are on the whole doing the right thing. It's just they're busy. They're working in a system that actually is not really built to support them as well as it needs to.
It is improving, but like I said, there is still probably some room for some more incentives, and not just purely financial incentives, but even social incentives to get clinicians to share more information.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, now, George, I want to talk about Ozempic, or the GLP-1 weight loss drugs. They were invented to help people manage their diabetes, but of course, they're now being sought after by celebrities, influencers, and average person on the street to help with weight loss. Now, there are two digital health angles here. So firstly, Australian-founded company ResMed, which provide cloud-connected medical devices for the treatment of sleep apnea and other respiratory conditions, well, their shares suffered a massive dive yesterday of more than 13% after a study came out showing that the GLP-1 drugs effectively basically cured sleep apnea. And then the second angle for digital health and Ozempic is the telehealth wars. Incredibly unfortunate that this is the situation, but we do know that some providers are accused of prescribing GLP-1s and other drugs without proper clinical governance oversight. And then on the other side of the fence, you've got so-called vested interests who want to maintain the status quo, requiring telehealth services to only be operated by basically bricks and mortar-based clinicians. Now, there's clearly a demand for GLP-1s and consumers are voting with their feet, and they're going to go where they feel that they can get the quality service they want. So as it turns out, change is the only constant here. George, do you think we're going to see more disruption in healthcare from Ozempic and GLP-1s?
Well, Ozempic's very interesting. You know you've hit the big time when you get a Southpark episode. And if you don't realise, Southpark have just launched an episode specifically focusing on Ozempic. So, you know it.
I was so pleased. Have you seen it? Because I've heard about it, but I haven't watched it yet.
I started watching it and I must admit, it's funny. Southpark has its distinct type of humour, but I did laugh.
Yes. I believe there was a hilarious quote, something about rich people get Ozempic or GLP-1s and the not-so-rich people get a prescription to Lizzo's body positivity music.
Exactly. As you might know, I've got a family full of pharmacists and medicos, so we've had lots of discussions around this over the year. And I also have a lot of type 2 diabetics in my family who have struggled to get the Ozempic they need because of the problems with shortages. So there are some real challenges here. It is a great drug. It's very early on. It's been out there for a year or two. The weight loss effects have been pretty impressive. We really still don't know the long-term effects. We don't know how long people are going to stay on it and whether there's a bounce. Once they come off it, there's bounce back. So there's all that medical stuff. And I would refer you, there's a guy on LinkedIn called Michael Albert, whose father is famous for developing the cardio device, who's quite a good proponent about what's happening with GLP-1. Eric Topol's done quite a few interesting discussions around it as well. The key is, of course, drug by itself without lifestyle change doesn't lead to long-term effects. So there are other issues that need to play into place. The challenging thing is, like you said, we've seen a lot of people jump on board and make a quick buck out of it. I won't name companies who do it, but companies that sort of, promote themselves as online weight loss services without understanding the key clinical issues. Because, yes, telehealth is great, but an understanding of why people are using Ozempic, what their other issues are, what other health issues they have, because overweight has other health issues as well. And so if all you're treating is the weight loss and you don't take into account the cardiovascular risk, you don't take into account the social risk and all these other psychological challenges, you're not getting a full service. I think it does expose the fact that the reality is, we are in a commercial world. So the commercialization will happen. There will be people who try to take advantage of the situation. And I'm not saying that they're being fraudulent. They're just taking advantage of the situation as it exists. Had we known, we would have all bought Novo Nordisk shares many years ago.
Oh, yes, if only.
Novo Nordisk and Nvidia. If we just bought those two, Louise, we wouldn't have to be working now.
We could be in Greece permanently on holiday.
So we've got AI and weight loss. Combine those two, there's a multi-billion, trillion-dollar industry we should have been involved with. Look, I think it's the reality of the world and we just need to live with it. New drugs are going to pop up all the time. This one obviously has a wide reach, but we've seen the same thing happen in oncology over the years where oncology wonder drugs have turned up, have been available at very expensive prices, and the people have worked out ways of getting them. So we just need to educate consumers around when they are buying these drugs, what their expectations are, what their rights are.
Exactly. But I also don't completely buy that consumers can't be trusted to make the best decisions for themselves. So a lot of the language in the so-called telehealth wars, it sort of takes the consumer out of it. And, well, I would like to think if I'm using a service, yes, there's convenience and all of those sort of things, and there are commercial realities. But if I'm getting a crappy service, I'm not going to keep going to that place, or if I feel like they don't have my best interests at heart. So that concerns me as well. Like when Uber's arrived and all the ruckus, which all sees all ancient history now, but what ended up happening, of course, course, was the end result was that I actually quite often frequently use taxis now because their app is really good. They've got excellent customer service, and the customer service that Uber offers me, at least in Melbourne, I find is really just pretty appalling these days. So I've gone back to taxis because the quality of the service is better. But without that disruption from Uber, I bet you I'd still be ringing cars to take me to airports and wondering 40 minutes later where the hell they are.
Absolutely. That's a really valid point. Again, why do I still need to go to my GP to get a repeat prescription when I can do that online? At the moment, it's a reimbursement issue, but all those sort of things can be updated. So I think we'll see a shift towards the center for both of those. So the conventional medicine will probably shift more to better use of digital tools. The digital ones will have to shift more towards the conventional medicine because, those on the outliers will give it a bad name. But transformation is important, and we need to make sure we play an active role in it as we go across.
Yeah, that's right. Well, time for us to have a brief break. And when we come back, what we will normally be doing is interviewing a special guest of Pulse. But today is a longer episode because George and we're going to interview each other. So for this inaugural episode, George, you came up with what I thought was quite a genius idea, which is actually instead of interviewing a guest, we should be guests and interview each other.
Well, I thought it was a good idea. I mean, a lot of people have asked us over the years to do interviews on their podcast. So why shouldn't we interview ourselves on our own podcast?
I think it's a great idea. So how are we going to work this? Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. I'm happy to kick off. So Louise, how did you first get involved in digital health?
I first got involved in digital health when I was undergraduate first year occupational therapy student, where they would send us out on pracs. We were always in a hospital or at a community health centre somewhere. And I used to run around going, where are all the computers? And I didn't have better language for it. It wasn't so much that I was interested in technology per se, but I knew from the previous life that I had that computers were a great tool. And I didn't understand how healthcare could run without them. So I used to run around asking everyone, where are all the computers? And no one could give me an answer. So then I was probably quite an annoying OT student and graduated. It was suggested to me that I pursue a PhD. And I thought, well, then I can get the answers to my questions. And so fast forward a couple of years, I got the scholarship and decided I would do the PhD and then never looked back.
So even though you trained as an occupational therapist, you basically realized computers were the way to go forward and jumped into it early on.
My dad is not impressed, George, so he never understands why he paid for me to go to university and become an occupational therapist, and I never got a paycheck as an OT.
My mother, till her dying days, would ask me, so what hospital are you working at now, George? And I have to explain to her I'm working for a technology company, and she goes, but I didn't send you to university to do that. So it's the world is changing. So you did your PhD, and I mean, that would have been quite an interesting thing to do back in those days, because a PhD on digital health would have been hard to find someone who supervised. How did you find finding people who understood what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me this because I get to tell these little stories. I decided I wanted to look at why we weren't using computers in allied health. And as I said, I wouldn't use that language now, but at the time, that was all I had to work with. And I'd won the scholarship and I was at the School of Occupational Therapy as a PhD student. And back in those days, academia was a relatively new thing for OT. We'd always been a very hands-on discipline. And so the school that I was at was so excited that after Christmas, the new professor starts. And it was the first time the university was getting a professor. So she would be my supervisor. And that day, I think almost skipped into her office. I was so excited and I'd prepared my little research brief of what I wanted to do. Talked a million miles an hour at this poor lady who responded saying, I don't really think OTs should use computers. So I'm not going to be the right person. And so, yeah, I know. And like all my hopes and dreams just came crashing down in that moment. And I tried to convince her and I said, oh, no, but they really should. And here's the reasons why. And no, she wouldn't budge. And she said, if I changed my topic to look at how like people with disabilities or a patient group that OTs would work with, then she would consider supervising me. And I said, no, but I really need to look at the profession and the profession of occupational therapy and allied health as part of that. And I got threatened that they would take my scholarship away and kick me out of university. It was,
wow.
Yeah, it's insane, but it was devastating and I didn't have anywhere else to go. Anyway, and so...
That was this century, wasn't it? That wasn't last century.
Yes, I wasn't born in 1950. Yes, Botox isn't that good. So I was working at the university, actually in the computer science faculty for the university itself. So I was with IT guys. There's a whole other story how I landed there. But anyway, I was there and I went back to my office and I was crying. And by the way, I wouldn't suggest this is a wise move, is to cry at work. It's not always a good thing. But I was so devastated and I really didn't know what to do. And my boss, he's really quite senior now. I forever owe him a debt of gratitude because I think at first he was like, oh my God, how do I get this woman to stop crying? And so he's like, what happened? What can I do? And so I'm like, oh, I don't have a supervisor. I'm going to get kicked out of uni. And he said, oh, I've got a mate who's a professor in the School of Business and Information Systems. Would you consider meeting with him? And through my tears, I was like, yes, that would be great. And so a week or two later, I was so nervous and I was saying to my partner, oh my God, if I don't convince this professor, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Anyway, and so we met in a coffee shop. And I was probably very nervous and talking very quickly. He cut me off within 1 minute or something and actually said, Louise, I'd love to take you on as a student. And those two men were pivotal in my career. And I don't think they had any idea at the time, because I know I didn't, how pivotal those two moments would be. And there weren't a lot of digital health people around in those days.
Oh, exactly. And in particular in allied health, because again, the focus back then was how it was used indirectly in medicine and, looking at it from an administration perspective. So obviously you're well ahead of the pack when it comes to those thoughts. But interestingly, the resistance you saw, the people thinking there's no place for computers in occupational therapy. That's exciting that you managed to push your way through, and exciting that you found people to do that. So you do a PhD. You're now a Dr. Louise Shaper. I'm assuming you didn't go to the equivalent of the Sydney Morning Herald in Perth and look up digital health jobs and try and find them. How do you find work?
I know. I don't think it's changed a hell of a lot. But yes, there were no jobs. And in those days, we used the words e-health and health informatics. Digital health still hadn't even been invented. So literally, it was all networking. So I found an organisation called the Health Informatics Society of Australia, and they were a member organisation. And they had a website, and I emailed them. But I was like, oh, I'm Louise, and I'm a PhD student. I'm in Perth. But if I could make my way to one of your conferences, and I volunteered, I'll give out name badges, I'll run microphones, like General Dog's Body, I'll do anything if you'll let me come for free, if I could get myself over. And I was thrilled because they said yes. And giving out name tags is a brilliant networking thing because, someone comes up and says, oh, my name's George Margellis. And while you're looking for their name, I get to say, oh, where do you work, George? And, and I'm Louise, I'm doing a PhD. Because the second conference I came to, people were hugging me and I was like, this is weird. I'm nobody. I'm just this little student, and people remembered me. And I realized, I don't think it was anything particular to do with me, but it's a small community and a really close community. And people were so welcoming that they did remember me. And I volunteered at every conference I could for a number of years. And that's how I got my network.
I think that's how I probably first came across you, because I joined Heiser back in, I think it was 2000. Yeah, you're right. It was a very small community. People didn't know how to interact with each other because we all sort of had our own interesting areas of interest, and look where it grew to. We'll cover that, I'm sure, in future episodes. So that brought you along to the conference. You got to meet people at the conference. I know then you started doing some consulting work with one of the other organizations, particularly looking at some research. So, research in digital health was a whole new area back then. Now we talk about it as a given, but we had no idea how were we going to research this new field back in the days. What was your first research area after your PhD?
Well, actually, it was during the PhD. So my lovely PhD supervisor would also probably roll his eyes listening to this, because while I was a very good student, I should have finished my thesis way faster than I did, because I got so busy being I'll say yes to anything person that I was doing a lot of research while I was also doing my PhD. So I was responsible for the very first, I believe, National Census IT and Aged Care. It was through the Department of Health and a firm I was working for, a small consulting firm, and I was their research director. And we got that gig and I designed the survey. So I literally had the phone helpline come to my house and we sent out paper surveys, because it was important that we wanted to make sure people who dial up internet and minimal IT, that they could still respond to this survey. And then fast forward, I think you've done the most recent one.
Actually, I do remember that original survey because we often refer back to that survey, and it demonstrated how little technology there was in aged care at the time and how the government had no initiative about it. Okay, then you started getting actively involved in the conference space. So you attended a lot of events. I remember you at the Chick events and you at the Heiser events. How did you see the industry growing and how did you see your role changing going forward?
Good question, because I don't know whether I really thought about my role. I think I was always just so grateful to be in the room. And, people would ask me to get involved in various things and I would say yes and then Google what the hell was that thing I just said yes to. So that was always my default. I don't know whether I thought at the time where I would be going. I knew it took years before I actually threw out all of my notes from university when I finally realized, I really probably shouldn't touch a patient ever again anyway. It's been too long since I've studied anatomy. So I don't know whether I thought about my own role. I was usually a research assistant, but this was when NETA was just getting founded. And so as a consultant, I worked under Ian Reinecke back in the day. And then Peter Fleming, one of the earliest critical projects I got involved in was working with Dr. Peter Sprivulis from WA, who was leading the benefits realisation work for NETA at the time, now the Digital Health Agency. And it was fascinating. I was working with people way smarter than me, and I got to learn about a whole different way of doing research. Peter and his team created some really significant modelling, and my job was to go into the library, because in those days you still physically went to libraries, and actually put together research articles and papers, which ended up creating NETA's first literature database. It was really formative, and I just felt so grateful to be there.
And then the big opportunity came along. The Heiser CEO role became available. And I remember you at the time were fairly nervous about that, about how you fit in. Do you want to talk about what made the spin to apply for the digital health job in Australia, basically?
Yeah, I will tell that story, thanks, because I'm so proud of my time there. But at the same time as well, I think there's some lessons there about how other people see you differently than you see yourself. So I was a volunteer for the Health Informatics Society of Australia. At that time, I, with another colleague, established the WA branch. So we actually started to get a local community together. And the CEO at the time, Brendan Lovelock, announced at the conference that he was retiring and moving on to other roles. And so I just called him up and just says, "Oh my God, I heard you're leaving. What are you going to do?" So I just rang him sort of for the gossip and as a friend, "Hey, what's going on?" And he actually said to me, "I hope you're going to consider applying for my role." And I laughed because it literally had never crossed my mind. And I had 2 other phone calls from people saying, "Hey, you should apply for this role." I still remember getting off the last phone call and walking into the kitchen, and my partner was cutting up carrots for dinner. And I mentioned this role and I said, "I think maybe I should apply." Now, the odds are I'm not going to get it. I've never been a CEO before. I've never had a national role and been responsible for other people. I thought it'd be a long shot. But, I don't do things by half. So if I'm going to apply, I'm all in. But what do you think? And he didn't even look up from cutting the carrots. He just went, "Of course you have to apply." And I was like, "But let's say if I did get it, we would have to relocate our whole lives." And he went, "Yes, so?" Like it was nothing. Anyway, and then my wonderful dear friend Nigel Charteris helped me put together, because I had an academic CV at that stage. I didn't have I'm a CEO, see? I didn't even know what one looked like. Anyway, and I applied for the role. And even though, as I said, I was encouraged to do it, there were certainly no guarantees that I would get the role. And I'll tell you a story, because you've got a part in this story, George, but I'll tell you a bit that I don't think I've ever told you. I ended up getting an interview over the phone and then also had an in-person interview. I never owned a pair of high heel shoes. I was like, I need to be able to dress like a CEO. So my girlfriend, Kate, took me shopping and she told me to buy these patent leather heels, which were gorgeous, but they were really high and I didn't think I could walk in them. And part of the interview is I had to prepare a presentation, and not a PowerPoint, like a physical piece of paper. So I printed out this one page and I had to walk around the table and hand everybody a copy, regardless of what I was going to say about why they should hire me as the CEO. All I could think about is, please don't fall over. Please do not fall over. Now I can walk in high heels. I'm quite good at it. But at the time, no, that was pretty much my first outing in high heels. And I didn't fall over.
You did impress us. So a big disclaimer, I was on the board that voted to give Louise the role as CEO, and she didn't fall over while she was handing out the paperwork, and nor did she. She did a great job, and the rest is history. During that time, I mean, you were there for quite a while, you saw some major changes in digital health. Think those changes have been positive? Do you think we're moving in the right direction?
Oh, 100%. And I think you could talk about the technology that we've seen and the rollouts of EMRs and those sorts of things. But I think the big change that I've seen in the last sort of 15 years, let's say, of my career is actually the cultural change. So it used to be me and George and talking to, people like ourselves who had drunk the Kool-Aid and thought that there was something to this, digital health and healthcare needed to transform for the benefit of patients and clinicians. And now I find not only is that group of people much larger, but it's just so much more diverse. There's just been this big cultural change and acceptance that I'm not saying we're there yet, but the traditional models of how we do healthcare can be improved by using technology as a tool to enable better care. And that, I would say, is the major change I've witnessed.
Fantastic. Well, like I said, this sector has diversified greatly. Like I said, back in the early days, there were people who were deeply ingrained in it and sort of had lots of knowledge around the technology side of things. But now you're finding lots more clinicians, a lot more consumers, a lot more other people just get actively involved in it. So the world is your oyster, as they say. And like you said, now we've got a podcast and they're doing a whole bunch of exciting other things. And I'm sure over the next many episodes, we'll be digging deeper into those. But thank you. I hope that gives people a bit of an understanding about who Louise is and why she's the person to listen to on your podcast.
Thanks, George. And thanks for being such an awesome, not just co-host, but a great interviewer. So I'll let everyone know that we didn't share questions ahead of time. So I had no idea what you were going to ask, George, but thanks. They were great questions. And I got a chance to tell some stories of things that I'm proud of and people who have helped me along the way. So thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. So that means you're up next. Are you happy to go up next?
Yeah, let's go with it.
Okay, then. So I've got some similar questions. So, Dr. Margelis, you started your career as an optometrist and then you later transitioned into medicine and the field of digital health. What made you pursue a career in the healthcare sector and first as being an optometrist?
It's a good question, actually. So back in the last century when I went through school, basically your HSC result determined what you were going to do. So I had enough marks to get into optometry, but just not quite enough marks to get into medicine. So I decided the optometry was a nice clinical career. I always wanted to be involved in healthcare in some way. My older sister had graduated as a pharmacist. A little story, I actually originally enrolled in pharmacy. So I actually spent 3 days as an enrolled pharmacy student before I realized that I really don't like working in pharmacy. So that's when second round offers became available for university. So I changed my options and quickly changed over to optometry because that was a more patient-focused career and seemed to be a lot more interesting. And I was a bit of a maths and science geek. So optometry had an advanced physics as part of it. So that's what got me involved in optometry. And very similar to you, the optometry school, even though it was quite a technical school, had one computer in it. It had an Apple II computer that the professor who was doing research in color vision used. That was literally the only computer in the entire optometry school building. And he demonstrated to us how he could do some really cool things using this computer. So around about the second year of optometry school, I sort of started getting interested in the computer. Now, Apple II computers were way outside my price range this is 1980, 81. They were a couple of $1,000, and a couple of $1,000 back then would buy you a car, let alone a computer. So the company called Sinclair introduced this little computer called a Sinclair ZX81. It was a $300 computer, had less computing power than my watch does now, I'm sure. But yeah, that was my introduction to it. So I got a computer then and started playing around with it and continued to do my course and, played around with the computer. But there was no real way of integrating it into the course. It just wasn't accepted as part of the course. I kept in touch with this guy who was the professor of color vision, and he sort of introduced me to some concepts. Graduated as an optometrist, went straight into practice. And one of the first things I realized back then was that, we had 8x5 little filing cards that we did all our records on. And optometry in those days used to have a recall system where every couple of years you'd send a mail to the old patient saying it's time for a renewal. And we used to literally do those with pen and paper. So we used to write in the book every month. we'd actually have a book, and every month we'd write down the names of the patients who we'd seen that month. And 2 years later, we'd go back to that book and look up their records and literally handwrite them requests to come back to visit us. And I sort of went, computers can probably do this. So by then I had saved up a bit of money. So I'd bought myself a Commodore 64. I remember it was $699 back then. That was, that was probably 3 weeks pay at a time. They bought a program with it called Superbase, which was a database. And I wrote a database. So I actually, as patients were coming into my practice, I was, capturing all their demographics. I was actually able to keep a copy of their prescription, and I could, set a flag so that after 2 years, it would automatically send them a reminder letter. I'd print out a letter, and my colleagues sort of went, "Oh, that's amazing," So I started playing around with computers then. And back then I sort of, I did no particular intent of going down a computing career. I decided that the clinical side of optometry wasn't as fulfilling as I would want it to be. So I decided to enroll in medicine. So I went back through university, started medicine at the University of New South Wales. But at this stage, I was starting to get a bit more hands-on with my computers, and I'd upgraded my computers a couple of times. And I did a couple of years of university. And at that time, I was communicating with people around the world. There was a bit of medical computing stuff happening, but just general computing was really taking off. And I thought, okay, I'll do a bit of a side hustle here. I'll import some software from America and resell it in Australia. And it needed some minor changes to make it work in Australia. America used the month, day, year, date fields, and Australia used the day, month, year fields. So I learned enough programming to be able to take some source code and adapt it. And I thought, I'll make a few bucks on the side selling some software via mail order just to supplement my income as I was going through uni. Well, that ended up taking off. So I sort of took a year off uni to grow that business, and the business grew really well. So I took a second year off uni. And during that second year of uni, I have to say, I met my wife and, fell in love. And a couple of years later, we got married. So I decided, I'll take a little bit more time off. Ended up taking 10 years off uni.
Well, you were like a startup founder in that time. Like, did you consider commercializing your optometry database?
The word startup didn't even exist in those days. So I actually used to give it away to colleagues. I mean, I gave copies of my software program away to colleagues to use. And I got involved in this company. Yeah, the company grew quite well. It wasn't focused just on that. So we started expanding into various different other types of software, including it. We ended up finally in educational software as sort of a main focus. And after 10 years of growing that company, getting married, having one child by that stage. We hadn't had any other kids at that stage. After 10 years, I sort of thought, I really wanted to do medicine. So we sold the company and I went back and did medicine. So, after a little 10-year hiatus, I came back to med school, but I was really lucky. So I then enrolled at med school at University of Sydney. And there was a gentleman there by the name of Professor Michael Kidd, who you know very well, who was a professor of general practice, but was also, a digital health guru. But actually, I don't think anyone at the university knew he was a digital health guru. I think he did that as a sideline because, as far as they were concerned, he was a professor of general practice and he was an amazing guy. And I introduced myself to him and we started talking, and he brought me onto what they called then the IT committee for the University of Sydney's medical school. And he introduced me to a whole bunch of people. He introduced me to Enrico Carrera. He introduced me to Michael Legg. He introduced me to quite a lot of people. And that's when I sort of went, there's an opportunity here for these two passions of mine to work together. And graduated from medicine, worked a couple of years in the hospital. And I thought there'll be a role for me within the health system as a digital health specialist. And, I worked at a hospital which actually had an EMR. It was quite an advanced hospital. And I sort of went, what can I do as a doctor who understands technology? And they had me helping them unplug network cables into the back of computers. And I went, that's not really what I had in mind. So after a couple of years at the hospital, and they said, the hospital was very computerized, but there was no roles at all within that hospital for a clinician to be involved in that program. It was a purely IT project.
Right, so you weren't the CMIO there?
So I was still a junior medical officer at New South Wales Health. So I spent 2 years there. And after 2 years, I sort of went, there must be something else here. So I decided to take some time off and just think about my career. Because I sort of went, do I go back into the hospitals? Do I start going to general practice? Do I go back to optometry? And because that was an option. Do I fund? And then I was lucky. Literally, I think it was my last rotation. I was at Penrith Hospital working in geriatrics, which is funny considering what I'm doing now as well. There was an advertisement in one of the papers, and this is where I use that Sydney Morning Herald. There was this little ad in the Sydney Morning Herald about the future of medicine is technology, and we are looking for people to help us in our journey into technology in healthcare. And I went, that sounds interesting. It could either be a scam or it could be an interesting job. So I rang up these people and they said, come over. And there was a company called Macquarie Health, which is now Penn CS and many other things. And they were basically a private hospital group, but they had an innovative little group within their organization that was looking at how they used digital technologies in the day. I went in and they sort of said, we haven't really had too many doctors through here, but hey, let's give it a try. I actually remember I went on a 3-month trial period to see whether, we think it would work. It seemed to. The CEO back then was Tom Wenkart, a well-known medical practitioner at the time. Edwina, his daughter, is now the CEO of the main organization. After 3 months, we sort of said, yeah, look, this is really working. And I spent 5 years there working with the software development team around developing what was then really interesting solutions around improving both the hospital's efficiency, but also some consumer health tools. We actually had the concept of personal health record and self-diagnosis tools. So we were tinkering around with what we now call AI, but back then was very algorithmic, using it for diagnostics. So that's what really entrenched me into the sector. And I learned a lot there. I learned a lot about healthcare. I learned a lot about technology. I learned a lot about business. And after 5 years there, quite enjoying the role there, I got a tap on the shoulder from some people from Intel who sort of said, well, we're starting a health group. Would you be interested in joining us? And I went, don't you guys make microprocessors? And they said, yes, we're the world's largest microprocessor making. Oh, okay, please explain to me. And so I met a guy at Intel called Eric Dishman, who I know you've met as well. And he told me about his vision, how healthcare and technology will work together. And I went, oh. And that, I must admit, that was the only reason I would jump ship from Macquarie, which was a really interesting role, and spent 12 years then working with Intel in their digital health group. And again, there's lots of stories we can tell about that. But yeah, it was totally unplanned career progression. I mean, I now tell my sons, you need to have a career plan. They go, what was your career plan? I'm going, good question. What's tomorrow to bring? And
yeah.
But yeah, again, it goes down to that, what you talked about when you applied for that role of CEO. The willingness to take a risk, the willingness to try something different, and to have a vision about what you want to do and leverage that. So, it's I can't say it's classical career planning advice, but it's worked out well. It's been a really enjoyable career because you've got to see lots of different things. And like I said, now we're taking some of the things we learned from healthcare and taking them into aged care, which is the next big area which needs that digitization.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I love these stories. Okay. So you've spent the last 5 years pretty much focused in aged care, never really moved away from digital health. But what motivates you about digital health and innovation in the aged care sector?
Look, I've always believed that you need to constantly look at how you improve what you do. And the beauty is we've managed to improve many of the processes we have in healthcare and in aged care, making those changes scalable, making those changes, measurable has always been part of the challenge. So digital basically enables us, I feel, to capture best process, systematize it, and make it available to everybody. So we actually don't have the equity issues where only those who have the available resources to do things can get things happening. So it's been an exciting opportunity. There's been some levels of frustration because not every digital solution is necessarily the best. So we need to work our way through it. But watching those changes and watching how you can take a small change and scale it out across an entire sector has been really exciting.
And there's so many opportunities in aged care as well. I think we're still at the beginning in some respects, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah. And then we need to find what the next one's going to be. And you and I have discussed how this growing longevity science area may be the next big area we can take digital technology into as well.
Oh, yes. All right. Let's reschedule a conversation about health span and longevity another time. And actually, I think we've got some good guests lined up to talk about that with us. So that'll be fun. All right. Now, I'm going to ask you a few personal questions, George. So this is sort of like quick, fast round. So balancing your career and your family must be challenging for everyone. What's your morning routine? What time do you get up in the morning? What happens?
Nowadays, as I'm sort of starting to wind down, I do get up later. Back during those busy days, I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning, check my email first thing in the morning. Yeah, I always had some sort of mobile device on my bedside for the last 15 years at least, I'm sure. Check my email. I used to then go, where I live here in Maroubra, go down the beach for a walk to get a little bit of exercise in. Come back by 7:30, check my email again. So I tend to be a little obsessive with the checking of the email. Social media hasn't made it easy because now I check my email and my social media. And then literally, hit the computer screen and just read whatever I can. I mean, I found that there's so many resources out there and there's just so much you can learn in this sector that you just have to follow rabbit trails down to find bits of information and read them. So I have to admit, I spend a lot of time reading stuff and then attending events. I've always found that the best way to share knowledge in this area, we did a great job during COVID, during Zoom, but being in the same room with people and talking to people and comparing ideas and watching when their eyes roll when you say something so you know how you need to change your discussions is fine. So, and they've always been long days. I'm not the sort of person who finishes at 5 o'clock, comes home and doesn't do anything else. My mobile phone or tablet or other device is usually sitting next to me even while I'm watching TV and I'll be checking for anything new. But I think the key thing is just that constant desire to find out what's happening. I think is what drives a lot of the way I do things.
Oh, I love that. And you mentioned the device by the bedside for 15 years. I remember when I finally got a handheld device that was going to get email, and that was all I wanted. And I had you in mind. And I remember speaking to Telstra over the phone going, I want a BlackBerry. And this guy's like, no, you don't want a BlackBerry. I'm like, no, I really do. All the cool kids have one, because I'd seen yours. And that was the year he was like, no, there's this new thing called an iPhone. I'm going to send you one. If you don't like it, I'll let you swap it back for a BlackBerry. So yeah, I just remembered your BlackBerry.
So funny you mentioned that. In my office here, I've got this drawer where I've literally got all my old phones and I literally have a Palm Trio from 2003. I have an HP smart. I've got just so many gadgets in there. One of these days, my kids threaten they're going to open a museum of ancient technology, in my name.
You could do. Okay, what's your favorite current gadget?
Look, my favorite current gadget has to be my new Samsung Fold, the folding phones. It's a little bit heavy, a little bit clunky to carry around, but the ability to have a big screen and a small screen so I can use it as a phone. I can do my messaging, but then when I want to read a journal article, I open it up and I can read the whole journal article in a nice wide script. So I don't need to stick my nose on the screen. So I think that's probably my favorite. And the other thing would be my digital TV box. The fact that I can now watch channels from around the world so easily on my digital TV box. So I've become quite happy with that as well.
Okay, good. What is a book you're currently reading?
Good question. I've just finished reading a book called Why We Die by Nobel laureate, I remember his name, Vima Venkatesh. Very, very interesting book. So it looks very much at the science of aging, but in a very detailed way, and the physiological and biochemical changes associated with aging and dying. So that's really, I tend to be a technical book reader. I very rarely read novels. I tend to read textbooks, and that's the most recent book. But a lot of reading recently around, again, that longevity science area, Peter Attia stuff, David Sinclair. I've been trying to get my head around a lot of that stuff, mainly because I'm getting older and I think about those sort of things.
Well, I haven't listened to it yet, but just this morning I downloaded a podcast and I just checked as you were talking. Yeah, it's the guy who wrote Why We Die. So I haven't listened to it yet. Okay, tea or coffee?
Definitely coffee. Lots of coffee.
What is your favourite drink?
Other than coffee?
Yes.
I'm not a big alcohol drinker. We go through a hell of a lot of Diet Coke in our household. And, that seems to be our drink of choice because that gets you caffeine without the sugar. But if I'm going to have a drink, I'm Greek. So I have to have an ouzo with ice, but usually sitting on a Greek beach with a bit of a octopus on the side. But yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. And one last question. If you had time to learn a new skill, what would that be? Something you've always wanted to learn how to do?
Good question. I mean, I'd say I want to learn how to sing, but I think my vocal cords would disagree with that. I am fascinated, and I don't think I know enough about AI to be able to talk about it. So I would really like to understand more the science behind the AI. And again, that makes me sound like a real nerd, but we talk a lot about AI, but there's a lot behind the scenes that we don't understand. And I'd be really keen to dig into the mathematics behind it. That would probably take another 20 years of my career. Maybe I can change careers again. I'm sure my wife would love me to do that.
Oh, well, we make it related to,
Sure.
healthcare, and it'll be fine. And I lied. I do have another question for you. You have these 30 odd years of experience, George, and a really fabulous career that's taken you everywhere around the world, knows you. You're famous. I find when I go overseas, if I talk about George from Australia, everyone knows who I'm talking about. You don't need a last name. So given all of that years of experience, and as you said, you're still just learning all of these things in some ways, what advice would you give to young professionals or students who are aspiring to enter this field of digital health and make a meaningful impact?
That's a great question, actually. So look, the first thing I'd say is that digital health encompasses health. So the core thing around healthcare delivery is understanding that you are treating a human being, and what you want to do is improve their quality of life however you can. So focus on the health outcomes as your core part of it, but then just remain curious. Remain curious about what you can do to make their life better, help them relieve their symptoms, help them improve their health span going forward. Just remain curious and just keep your mind open to different pieces of information. So you don't have to stick to the tried and tested textbooks that you've been told are the only way you learn things. Just open other publications, read other magazines, read other publications. Look for, if a journal article comes across your desk, have a look at it. Keep on reading, keep on looking for new stuff, and just remain curious the whole time. The curiosity will be your driver, and that you'll find will enable you to build up the skill sets you need to deliver both better healthcare, but also play a more active role in the sector in general.
I love that, George. It's beautiful advice. And hopefully our Pulse podcast can actually help with this as well. That's one of the key things you and I are really interested in, is meeting people's curiosity and making them a little bit more curious. Absolutely. Maybe about what's happening.
So should I ask you about your morning routine? I have seen emails from you at 4:45, so I know your morning routine starts early.
It does. It's not as good as it should be. But yes, it is an early morning, and yes, I know you're not supposed to look at your phone before you get out of bed, but that's how I start my day. It's like, what happened overnight? What's on LinkedIn? What do I need to know about today? And I must say, even though that's incredibly bad advice to give to other people, so I won't, but it's so helpful. Like the amount of things, like I have electronic notes folder that I use, and there's not a day goes by that I don't add new ideas to things, or, I don't have time now, but I'm going to follow up and read that journal article, or, I just saw a really interesting post that George has done. I'm going to talk to him about that, or whatever. Like, it's so good, because otherwise I find if I don't make notes about these things, I'll forget. Like, what was that great idea I had 2 weeks ago? I don't know. You've been a great interviewee guest today, George. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that. It's a great experience. And like you said, learning about, we've known each other for 20 years, and we're still learning about each other. So like I said, curiosity between us continues to grow our friendship and our relationships. I'm looking forward to the Pulse podcast, even expanding that even further.
Brilliant, yes. And the next 20 years of our friendship as well. There are going to be more things to share.
Absolutely, absolutely. And once we get this health span thing, it'll be 40 or 60 or 80. You can just keep on growing on that.
Let's make that happen. Now it's time for an update from our correspondent, Kate McDonald from the Pulse+IT News Desk. Welcome, Kate. What have you got on for us for this week?
There's a lot happening, as there always is in digital health. Some of the big news we've been following over the last few weeks are our old friends, the ransomware hackers, who wreak havoc across the healthcare system relentlessly. We've had our health insurer Medibank back in the news. They had a hack in 2022 that saw the data of about 10 million people stolen. So new information produced in court showed that an insecure virtual private network was the main problem. The hacker used a form of malware to get in, and they're putting the blame on a lack of multi-factor authentication, a lovely IT term there, an alert system that wasn't working as it should. Our Australian Information Commissioner is taking Medibank to court, suing them for probably a large amount of money, saying an organisation of its size and with its resources, it's the biggest insurer in Australia, should have done better, basically. So we've been following that pretty closely. There's also a terrible incident in London with a pathology provider called Synovus. They were hacked by ransomware hackers just over 2 weeks ago, and that's disrupted blood tests in some pretty big hospitals in London. It's still not resolved, and the hackers have demanded $50 million in ransom, which I don't think they're going to get. But that's affected mainly IT systems for blood transfusions, and it's been pretty awful, actually. We've been watching that closely. We've just launched our new Pulse+IT Ireland edition, and we've been covering that as part of European-centred coverage. Ireland's just launched a new digital health strategy that's actually pretty good, and they're going to release this year or next year a shared care record for everyone. We here in Australia know all about that. We'll see how it goes, but their digital health strategy is really, really good. So we'll cover that in future, what Ireland's getting up to. Another story this week was New South Wales state budget that was handed down with quite a lot of money for what is an interesting concept, and that is the single digital front door into healthcare services. This can range from a website for a GP clinic to a big hospital to statewide digital front door, which is what New South Wales is doing. Digital front doors are really gaining in popularity as a way to help patients navigate complex healthcare systems by providing one point of contact for lots of different services that are interconnected. South Australia announced that they're doing the same thing, and they've even got an ad campaign on television to promote the fact that if you're not really that sick, do you really need to go to the emergency department? Instead, call this one single number and you will be triaged and sent to the most appropriate care. This is something that's really taking off around the world. Ontario in Canada has been doing this. They've got a 811 number that they're trying to make sure that everyone goes through that single digital front door. And what's interesting, that we'll have a story this week, a big health service in Queensland is exploring this as well. And they are using pretty much enterprise-level CRM systems rather than healthcare-specific systems. Microsoft Dynamics, Salesforce. It's really, really an interesting area that's emerging. And this week, New Zealand saw some ramifications of their recent budget, which cut a lot of funding for digital and data, and it clawed back a lot of funding. And that's had a bad, perhaps, outcome for its HERA program, which is an interoperability program. And we've had some great reporting on that from our New Zealand reporter, Rish Lyon. And he's also been covering a big story about the age of New Zealand's IT infrastructure for healthcare, which is creaky, to say the least. And finally, this week, we'll have some news on everyone's favourite topics, which is interoperability standards. The SPART program, which is a really interesting program funded by the Australian government and being managed by the CSIRO, it's working on rolling out fire standards across the country, and they will release today a core set of clinical data that everyone hopefully will use. It's similar to what the Argonaut project in the US achieved with this core data for interoperability. So we'll see that today. And that's some of the news that's been happening.
That's it. You've just covered how many countries in that update, Kate?
And that's the first episode. Look, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously the hacking issue is a major challenge, and every time I speak to anyone in healthcare, cybersecurity gets raised. And the biggest challenge with cybersecurity is that it is an expensive exercise to manage, and therefore that comes out of your IT budget. So the more you spend on cybersecurity, the less you have to spend elsewhere. So it's going to be an ongoing challenge going forward.
Yeah, it really is. But at the same time, I mean, it's 2024. We really need to make sure that the people who run our health services actually understand that this is not an IT expense anymore. I mean, we need a more sophisticated, mature level of understanding. I understand that as a result of that attack in the NHS that you talked about, Kate, that people are now having to wait. They've been told by the NHS they're having to wait 6 months to have another blood sample taken. 6 months. And some of that isn't just going to be, my iron levels need to be checked. Some of that will be higher priority cases. This has a direct impact on your ability to care for patients if you don't get it right.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess the importance of having a plan B is obviously highlighted. You need to look at that. Interesting, New South Wales. I mean, being a proud New South Welshman, looking forward to the state of origin and us not losing by as many points next time. New South Wales is doing some great stuff with this single patient record. There's a lot of money being spent. I still question how we connect it all together because primary care is outside the domain of New South Wales Health. I know they're leveraging things like Health Direct to link them all in, but I would love to see a combined view about how we're going to do this. But Having, like I said, spent the last couple of weeks working my way through the system, it would have been great to be able to log in at 3:00 in the morning and check how my relative is doing, or check that what services are coming into play. The data's all there. It's just not available to us. Whether a single record's the answer, I'm not 100% sure, but I think collaboration still is part of the big picture.
New South Wales Health is spending $1 billion over 10 years on a new Epic EMR, which they're calling the single digital patient record. And this funding in last week's budget was for the digital front door. There's digital everything, single digital everything, it seems like, in New South Wales Health. Lots of money going into it. How it all links up is what everyone's looking at. And will it all work together?
Every time I pay for the toll road, I'll know that money's going to good use. So that's one good thing.
That's good. And I think your last story there, Kate, as well, we really should put our hands together and congratulate all of those people who are working on the interoperability standards. It's such critical, important work. And to hear that they've had that breakthrough and agreed on a core set of clinical data, that's just incredible. So my personal hats off to everyone. Most of those people, they're all volunteers and they're doing really great work.
Yeah, no, it's a really important first step.
We'll have some of them on the podcast in future. I think talking to some of them, trying to explain what interoperability standards are, it's always fun in plain English.
I did spend yesterday in a standards discussion, and I must admit I still struggle. So, yes, I'm looking forward to them deciphering that for us.
Maybe we can make a Southpark episode version. Pitch it to the guys. Well, Kate, congratulations to yourself as well. Just wanted to call out that you are now responsible for Pulse+IT news at a global level with multiple countries and journalists reporting into you. So congratulations. We've known each other for a long time and you deserve all of the praise and you work really hard. So well done.
Thank you very much, Louise. We've gone global.
It's very exciting.
Looking forward to having a Guinness along with my Pulse+IT in the future.
All right. Thanks, Kate. We'll see you on the next edition.
Oh, I'm not going to say no to that.
Okay, George, so that's our first episode of Pulse, all wrapped. How do you think we did?
It was lots of fun. I don't know how everyone else perceives it, but I had a great time. So hopefully we'll continue to do many, many more. At the end of the day, it's all about sharing. So looking forward to sharing with you and getting you to share back with us your ideas and impressions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, George. One of the things that I'm so excited about the podcast is that for us both, community is everything. We know that the problems that we need to solve in healthcare are complex, wicked, challenging, not things that you can solve overnight. And so the only way we're going to progress to a healthcare system that we all want, need and deserve is by working together. And that takes all shapes and sizes and a large community, if not an army of people. So I'm hoping this podcast can contribute to that community and add value.
Absolutely. Yep. Like I said, it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes the whole country together to work together to solve our healthcare challenges.
Yeah, that's right. Well, until the next episode of Pulse, George, can you read us out?
Thank you for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse+IT Media. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Thanks to Nigel Charters, Emily Mara and Kate McDonald for contributing to today's episode. Subscribe, follow and rate Pulse wherever you get your podcasts. You can subscribe to Pulse+IT magazine at www.pulseit.news. Send your feedback and questions to pulsepod@pulseit.news.